So next we have Helen Monger, who was director of the London Historic Parks and Gardens Trust.
That's right.
So thank you.
Hello. I'll just see, I hope you can all hear me. I'm just getting used to the slide projection. Good afternoon, everyone. I've already been introduced. I'm actually really humbled to be here today. I'm probably the most junior, latest incomer. I'm not a landscape gardener. I'm not a landscape architect. But what I am going to talk to you about is where touches from what Steffi said about dealing with campaigning and the nexus of politics, religion, and landscape architecture. So, first a bit about the charity that I'm representing today, who are my former employer. It's a charity. It's known by a variety of other names using a combination of the words in the titles and acronyms, as you see on the slide tonight. And if I slip between one and the other, please forgive me. I was the first director of that charity, appointed in 2016, and this is where I first encountered Hal. As an aside, I left in 2024, about a year to the day, and I now work at the Open Spaces Society, and I'm very happy to discuss that work later. However, I wanted to focus on Hal and his work supporting me and London Historic Parks and Gardens, and a particular campaign I have worked very closely with him on for now nearly a decade. I don't think we ever thought it would last this long, but here we still are fighting it. I couldn't have prepared this without also giving recognition to three former chairs who were involved and who knew Hal well: Pamela Patterson, Barbara Sims, and Chris Sumner. And they have fed into this talk today and send their warmest regards to you. So the book that I've picked on, you've all heard of it, you've seen the cover many times today, is Slow Growth on the Art of Landscape Architecture. And I cheated by using ChatGPT to summarize it into 5 headings, which is what I'm going to base the talk on today. But I did also check with Hal, because I do know that ChatGPT hallucinates. But the bits I'm going to cover, which actually really resonated with me, are Hal's respect for historical layers, his instincts for natural growth over instant impact, his subtlety in urban design, his approach to landscape as a living process, and the landscape architect's invisible hand. And I'm going to illustrate that. So, moving back to the core tenets, this brings me to my first point about Hal, the invisible hand. From those who preceded me at the Trust, there is no recollection, actually, of Hal having any input into the charity's first conference, held in 1995. But they do know he was involved, and they do know that he made contributions to the 1999 conference and to the 2000 conference, discussing London views. At the time, the then Mayor of London had indicated he wanted to encourage more tall buildings. And this brings me to an example of Hal's foresight, and you'll know about this because it's all about views. This isn't the views you've seen so far. So Hal's presentation to the conference focused on 10 sightlines to St Paul's Cathedral from around the capital. Examples of such views included this 10-mile view from Richmond Park. The future of the sightlines was being called into question in a document entitled The London View Management Framework, which later came to be adopted and continues as a concept in planning policy to this very day. The draft framework at the time proposed more protected city views, but far narrower viewing corridors. The view of St Paul's from Richmond Park, known as King Henry VIII's view, was going to be halved in width. Luckily for Londoners, Hal sprang into action and published a critique entitled Poetic Views in Central London, Endangered Capitals, showing which famous views would be unprotected under the plans, and his good sense thankfully prevailed. In addition to the St Paul's view lines, Hal made the case for much wider bands of protection given to the views of the city skyline from Westminster, Waterloo and Hungerford bridges. In this work, he showed a respect for historical layers and the stories a view can provide, and this has a subtle and major impact on numerous planning applications. And this is where I'm going to bring you to an example I had experience of. So this is the London Eye, just visible. I sort of did it, I wasn't sure I was going to have a protector. I did it late at night, squiggling hand. Just there, you can see that is the London Eye, now part of our classic view. And it became the critical focal point about 3 years ago in a planning inquiry where I had to give evidence about a proposal in Lambeth, so miles from Parliament Hill, involving a tall building on the riverside, and this is what we then all peered at, very close up. And this very view actually resulted in the refusal of the proposed high-rise in 2019, unlike so many others that have gone up along the riverside in the Vauxhall area. So going back to the story of Hal's involvement in London Parks and Gardens, by 2003, I know that Hal had been appointed as our patron. And when I arrived, many years later, all I knew of the London Parks and Gardens patrons was that I had 3 names thrust to me on a letterhead. And I was informed that one of them had died a month earlier. The other, they had lost contact. That left me just one name, Hal. Had I read up a bit more on Hal before I approached him, I might have been far more deferential than I was, not realising his extraordinary work, and I think I would have been even more deferential had I been here before I approached you. I didn't know about his long association with Brenda Colvin, and I didn't know about his design of the now Grade 2 listed modernist Yulbury House. I immediately wrote him an email introducing myself very unceremoniously and seeking his help to save a historic park. And I didn't know what to expect. In fact, I rather thought he wouldn't bother to reply. I was blown away by the fact that I got a very courteous reply the very next day. And little did I know then, what I know now, that we would embark together on this major campaign. For those of you who are unaware of the Save Victoria Tower Gardens campaign, the government has sought to build a learning centre and memorial to the Holocaust in this small listed park, which is adjacent to the World Heritage Site of the Palace of Westminster. Their favoured design, with underground exhibition space, will subsume the gardens to being merely ancillary planting, the bits of fluff I heard referred to earlier today. I stressed before taking this any further, this discussion, that the campaign has absolutely no objection to a fitting memorial to the Holocaust, and we are indeed keen for the government to deliver an appropriate educational tool in which to tackle anti-Semitism. And I think it's a really important point to pause on given what's going on in the world at the moment. But where we, Hal and I, disagreed was on this choice of location and this particular design, which we didn't feel was appropriate. Others today will tell you about Hal's influence on global and national landscape policy, and it would be remiss of me not to mention at this point Hal's involvement also in ICOMOS. Hal has served on its Cultural Landscapes and Historic Gardens Committee, and his quiet networking has proved vital in securing UNESCO admonition of the UK government over these proposals, and resulted in Victoria Tower Gardens being nominated, and I'm not sure nominated is an accolade in this occasion, as the Europa Nostra most endangered site in Europe this year. I now want to tell you about one of my personal experiences of working with Hal on this very campaign. Incidentally, some of the slides which follow have a subtle grey background which I had to put on when Hal was presenting on my behalf for a parliamentary committee, and I'm now recycling them here to demonstrate some points. So when, in 2019, Hal and I met on a cold and rather damp day to walk around Victoria Gardens, during the walk, I learned from his very keen eye what had seemed to me a rather average sort of public park. And it had, in fact, been very cleverly designed and maintained to lead the eye and provide the ideal rural setting for the mother of all parliaments. And I just want you to note, it's these trees lined up, and you can see those trees there, and you can see what a grey day it was, and how the view is basically, your eye, when you stand at one end, is drawn to the Parliament, if you ignore the ugly building there. But anyway, that's another planning battle for another day. And what I had not appreciated was, and it's beautifully illustrated in Hal's plan, because he accurately put all the trees here, is that the landscape architect stroke designer had had some trees in the path and some trees in the lawn and then just at the end, a few more. So it's a tombe d'oeil, which makes what is actually a very small garden seem much larger and is the perfect setting for the Houses of Parliament. I have never forgotten that phenomenal insight, and that showed how subtlety in urban design uplifts a space. The deep understanding has proved crucial in much of the subsequent evidence we have both had to give to various officials who sadly are not here today and would benefit from hearing all of our views. So, during the campaign, he also saved my bacon by understanding far earlier than anybody else the importance of seeking a reasonable compromise. He immediately spotted a suitable location within Victoria Tower Gardens and sketched out a highly thought through possible solution to fitting either a memorial alone or, if absolutely necessary, a memorial with an associated underground learning centre. For reasons of campaigning, I wasn't ready to present the full option with the underground learning centre, but we agreed we would share more publicly the memorial as a concept. Luckily for me, Hal quietly persisted and sent in his fuller suggestion as a personal response direct to the minister. There have been many, many ministers now, and I don't know which one it was, which I later came to rely on when I was then giving evidence to a House of Lords Select Committee earlier this year to show what was possible and demonstrate just how intransigent the promoters had been in refusing to make any alterations to their proposals to the detriment of the park. This and the following slide show his suggestions submitted direct to the minister. And so you can see he spotted, right there, the location, which would be perfectly fine as a compromise. And then this is his impromptu designs, which I doubt were that impromptu because they're fairly well worked up. We're dealing with the government who has millions of pounds at their disposal, and we're able to produce this. And I'm very, very grateful that Hal did that pro bono for us as well. So I return to the tenets of Hal's book, which brings me on to the fourth point. It was Hal's immediate understanding of the landscape as a living process, the need to adapt and offer a positive, viable solution that has strengthened the power of our campaign immeasurably, and why I think we're still here. And that leaves me to cover examples of Hal's work to encourage natural growth over instant impact. Through research in preparation for today, I discovered that Hal served on the Royal Fine Arts Commission from 1989 to 1999. In this advisory role, he championed careful, sensitive interventions in Britain's landscapes and urban spaces, upholding design principles that value the slow, organic maturation of projects rather than quick eye-catching results. The philosophy is evident in his work at places like Regent's Park and Kenwood House. And I'm going to skip because I think I'm running over time. But that is obviously the classic view that shows just how subtle but brilliant Hal's impact is. And last, I would like to end on a personal note and thank you, both Chris Sumner and Pamela Patterson say of Hal, and I agree with this, he always seems to have been available, endlessly helpful and cheery, a real rock. Thank you.